Good evening to everyone. On behalf of the Association to Preserve the Eatonville Community Incorporated, we're known as PEC, I want to welcome you to day one of our academic conference. As we are exploring space and place, it's very good to have Dr. Leslie Poole, a colleague from Rollins College who has actually presented at the academic conference in years past. I'm N.Y. Nathiri, the executive director and the general manager for the Zora Neale Hurston Festival of the Arts and Humanities. We are known as Zora Festival as a brand. I want to acknowledge any number of persons, but starting with our sponsors, Orange County Arts and Cultural Affairs Programming, the Tourist Development Tax, of course, the town of Eatonville, the University of Central Florida, and the World Conference of Mayors. Tonight, we are pleased to have the support of Seminole State College of Florida, a decades-long supporter, and in this instance, the Department of Modern Languages and History and Humanities. Professor Trent Tomengo is an esteemed member of our Zora Festival National Planners, as well as the Academics Committee. And so tonight we start, as I say, the first in a series of 3 days where we are exploring the topic, looking at placemaking as a part of our cultural environment. I believe that I have done what I should do. I do want to acknowledge we have a board member present, Ms. Harrietta Finley White, who is our board treasurer. And I want to acknowledge special guest Jericia Graham, whose work is currently on exhibition at the Zora Neale Hurston National Museum of Fine Arts, and who is also in residency at the Art and History Museums, Maitland. I do also need to acknowledge that Professor Trent Tomengo is the president of the board of the Maitland Art and History Museums, and we are very pleased to have that connection. I don't want to prolong my preliminary remarks, and so I'm going to give sway back to Professor Tomengo.
Thank you, Mrs. Nathiri, for that introduction. I'm going to introduce Dr. Poole to the Zoom participants, and then we're going to give it to her so that she can give her presentation. Now, you won't be able to ask questions directly because everybody is on mute, except for the host. So if you have any questions, if you could put them in the Q&A, there should be a way you can do that. I believe I set it up this way. If you don't see a Q&A, then send me a chat, but I think you can do it. And we'll monitor the questions and answer questions after the presentation. All right. All right, so Dr. Leslie Poole. Leslie Kemp Poole is Associate Professor of Environmental Studies at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. A fourth-generation Floridian, Poole's academic research focuses on the environmental history of the state and the role of grassroots activism in saving and protecting its natural resources. Long a Zora Neale Hurston fan, Poole is working on a book chapter about how Zora has been memorialized by different cities. This talk comes from that research, and one of her favorite travel hobbies is visiting places associated with her favorite authors. And so without keeping you guys any longer, we give to you Dr. Leslie Poole. Leslie, is all yours.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you, Trent and Scott and N.Y. Nathiri, for inviting me to be here and for being my tech heroes. I am a historian who likes to sit in rooms with dusty boxes, so technology is not my greatest asset. But the other thing I like to do is tell stories. And you're right, one of my favorite things to do is to nerd out on Florida literature and Florida history and visit the places that I've been reading about. And so this is how I came to this project. I was already doing Zora visits around the state when this opportunity came up, and it fit really well into the theme of this year's Zora Festival. So I'm really happy to share it with you as well. Let's begin. Let's see, here we go. So we're going to talk about how 3 Florida cities have memorialized Zora, and we'll also talk about some other places around the state, and maybe do a little brainstorming about maybe how that could be expanded as well. But let's begin first with the beginning of the public awakening to, or I should say the modern public awakening to Hurston and her extraordinary talents. On a sweltering August day in 1973, Alice Walker clutched her long skirts as she waded through a field of waist-high weeds, looking for the grave site of writer Zora Neale Hurston. She called out Zora's name, asking, "Are you here?" Braving bugs and the possibility of lurking snakes, Walker found what appeared to be a sunken rectangle. Deciding it must be the spot, Walker drove to a nearby monument company and paid to install a granite headstone that reads, "Zora Neale Hurston, a genius of the South." With this and a subsequent Ms. Magazine article about her pilgrimage, Walker, who achieved literary acclaim with poetry and books, including The Color Purple, helped reawaken the world to the talented Hurston, now recognized as one of America's finest 20th century writers. "We are a people," Walker writes. "A people do not throw their geniuses away. And if they are thrown away, it is our duty as artists and witnesses for the future to collect them again for the sake of our children, and if necessary, bone by bone." Subsequent biographies revived Hurston's work, now a mainstay in classrooms and literary conversations around the globe. Her books have inspired countless fans to trek to Hurston sites, seeking connection and inspiration, and has led to the author's memorialization by communities capitalizing on her celebrity. She even got her own postage stamp in 2002, a true sign of her influence. Other authors are also posthumously celebrated around the country with festivals and markers, including William Faulkner in Oxford, Mississippi, and Ernest Hemingway in Key West, Florida, in addition to innumerable plaques and other physical monuments dedicated to various literary lights. Public memorials such as these can impact a community's identity, writes Ebru Gerler and Basak Ozer. Representing memories in this way not only reminds people of their social history without visiting a place specially, but also provides a correlation and helps to develop an empathy with citizens and strengthens urban memory. Public memorials are landscapes which make it possible to keep past events alive in the common memory through physical representation in public areas. And I should add, not only can you find Hemingway in Florida, but pretty much in any bar in Europe, they claim that Hemingway has been there too. Hurston memorials can be found in many places, including her hometown of Notasulga, Alabama, 2 information boards in Sanford, Florida, where she visited and wrote, and 2 markers in New York City, one noting her participation in the 1920s New Negro movement there. However, 3 Florida cities have fully embraced Hurston: Eatonville, where she grew up, St. Augustine, where she taught and wrote, and Fort Pierce, where she was buried. Those communities' memorials include markers, a park, a heritage trail, a mural, a museum, and 2 annual festivals, life celebrations that the author couldn't have imagined in her final years of poverty. Hurston's legacy in the historically Black community of Eatonville is deep. Her face shines from a bronze marker adorning an archway at the city's western entrance. She smiles in Technicolor from a playground mural and is celebrated in an annual festival and a museum dedicated to her, the Zora Neale Hurston National Museum of Fine Arts. And of course, that's why we're here today. Hurston claimed Eatonville as her hometown, a falsity since she was born in Alabama, but those facts were often ignored by Hurston as she navigated her way through the world, choosing to depict herself at whatever age suited her circumstances. She moved to Eatonville with her parents, Lucy and John, who left the crushing work of sharecropping for a new future that eventually led to John Hurston becoming a prominent preacher and the city's mayor. Eatonville, incorporated in 1887, is an all-Black town, offered its citizens respite from the horrors of Jim Crow and a level of independence from the outside world. In the city, writes Hurston biographer Valerie Boyd, racism was no excuse for failure. Here, individuals could sink or swim on their own merits. Hurston recalled, we lived on a big piece of ground with 2 big chinaberry trees shading the front gate and Cape jasmine bushes with hundreds of blooms on either sides of the walk. There were plenty of orange, grapefruit, tangerine, guavas, and other fruits in our yard. We had a 5-acre garden with things to eat growing in it, so we were never hungry. The family, which grew to 8 children, built a 2-story, 8-room house across the street from Joe Clark's store. The store, for Hurston, was the real heart and spring of Eatonville, where men, quote, sat around on boxes and benches and passed this world and the next one through their mouths. The right and the wrong, the who, when, and why was passed on, and nobody doubted the conclusions. For me, the store porch was the most interesting place that I could think of. I was not allowed to sit around there naturally, but I could and did drag my feet going in and out whenever I was sent there for something, to allow whatever was being said to hang in my ear. The men's lying sessions when they strained against each other and telling folk tales were a favorite event. These memories would serve her well in later years. Those tales were valuable in her later career when, as an anthropologist, she traveled through Florida, recording the stories and songs of Black laborers in lumber, phosphate, and turpentine industries. Her work as an anthropology student and then through the Federal Writers Project in the 1930s provided valuable information that perhaps no other person could have collected. It is found in her books, essays, short stories, plays, and subsequent biographies that remain widely read, along with her famed novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God, published in 1937. That's what made me a huge fan. And although Hurston lived in many Florida communities, she regularly returned to Eatonville to visit family and friends. On one trip back to town, she spotted the men on the porch playing a game and telling stories. When Mayor Hiram Lester hollered his greetings and asked if she was home to stay, she told him she was visiting to collect stories and tales. She explained to the skeptical group that the stories, quote, are a lot more valuable than you might think. We want to set them down before it's too late and they are forgotten. Hurston knew their value, even if the locals didn't. But with the Hurston Renaissance that began with Alice Walker, Eatonville came to embrace its famous daughter, prominently featuring her and the community she wrote about. Central to its efforts is the modest museum established in 1990, where visitors can see rotating art exhibits, buy Hurston books, and get a printed walking tour of the city. The tour highlights 10 sites, many of them depicted in Hurston's books, including the now vacant lot where her family once stood. That's on the top left. Joe Clark's store was across the street, but became a restaurant later. The church where John Hurston once served, and the current site of the Association to Preserve the Eatonville Community, Inc. That group, created as a nonprofit in 1987, is an umbrella for different causes, including the museum and the Zora Festival, also known as the Zora Neale Hurston Festival of the Arts, held annually since 1990. As you may know, the festival draws thousands of people to experience arts and crafts, music, and exhibitions highlighting Hurston and the rich life of the community. Just to go back to the picture here, this is the museum in the middle picture to the right.
Leslie,
sorry? Yes.
I don't think you're sharing screen.
Oh, okay. Let's see what's going on. Is that showing up?
No, not yet.
Have none of them been showing up?
No.
Uh-oh. Okay, let me go back to it.
You should have permission because we have it set.
Okay, I'm getting a send a copy. I'm sorry, I've been running through a bunch of different slides. Let me close this out and start it up again. I'm sorry, everybody. I'll run back through them in a minute. Let me.
No, it's been great.
Oh, no, no,
you're
pictures are
so
better.
descriptive. You've done a great job. We didn't even need the pictures because you were so descriptive.
Oh, well, let's see. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I didn't even know that you were talking about pictures until you said upper left. So
Yes.
the descriptions are very good.
Okay, so for some reason now it says it's uploading. Can you see it now?
Not yet. It should be that you're opening a screen that's open on your computer, and it should
Yeah.
basically share what a particular open screen that you've chosen.
Okay, I've got it. Darn. Oh, well.
I'm not sure if we can, there might be a way that we could open them for you, but
Can you open up the backup, Scott?
I could. I can see what I have a backup. Yes, I do.
Because mine's doing weird stuff now. Now it says it's uploading to OneDrive, so I don't know what's going on.
You want to keep going, I will work on that. I don't want to pause too long, but
Okay.
I can work on getting those up for you.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I do not know what has happened here. Okay. Okay, somehow my whole presentation has disappeared. So I don't know where it went.
Okay.
That's a wonderful exercise. Okay, so sorry, I'm really sorry. Okay, so I was going to show you pictures of buildings in Eatonville that you can go to, and you can get a walking tour map to actually do that. Unfortunately, there's really very little left. Her house has been torn down. There's one old house that does have a historical marker, and I think there's a few that could use some serious money to renovate and preserve, which would be a wonderful thing to see happen as well. Let me just move on to say, and there was a picture of the brass plaque at the front at the western gate, which is a really fun thing to see. Today, visitors from around the world come to see these Hurston sites as evidenced by a trip I took to the museum while researching this paper. The guest book showed signatures from local residents as well as from those other parts of the US. That day, an enthusiastic pair of young Bostonians relished the art of an upcoming museum exhibit and happily bought Hurston books. They became aware of the museum through an internet search for museums in Central Florida, their travel destination, and were last seen taking multiple photos of a large Hurston mural at a nearby playground, her radiant smile shining from them. Oh, okay, now is that working? Oh, yay.
That's me. That's me.
Okay. All right, so let's just slow down and we'll go back. Okay, all right. This is the marker in Alabama. This is the marker that's a pretty new one in Manhattan, New York. Okay, keep going. Okay, keep going. And that's the mural that I said that I saw the young men taking pictures of. Next one. All right, these are some of the sites. That's the bronze plaque of her that's on the pillar for the entrance into the city. On the left of this bottom is the Mosley house that she used to visit the people who lived there. And on the top left is what was the site of her house. It's now just kind of a fenced in grassy place. And in the middle is the museum. So let's see. All right, hang on a second. We're going to get to Fort Mose in just a second. Okay. Visitors want to connect with Zora Neale Hurston's hometown with her Eatonville. It's an emotional tie. It really speaks to the creative genius of the artist. It speaks to the power of artistry, according to N.Y. Nathiri. Eatonville is Zora Neale Hurston's hometown, and she made it a literary destination. Nathiri remembers getting ready to close the museum one day in the 1990s when a middle-aged white man breezed in and said, "I just had to stop." The man had read Hurston's masterpiece, Their Eyes Were Watching God, and realized while driving in inclement weather on nearby Interstate 4 that he was near Eatonville. He stayed maybe 10 minutes, but he just had to stop, Nathiri said, because Hurston had touched him in such a way. All right, next slide. Okay. During the course of research and writing, Hurston visited the historic coastal city of St. Augustine several times, even briefly getting married there to longtime beau Herbert Sheen in 1927. That same year, at the behest of a historian Carter Woodson and with funding from the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, she looked into historic records about Fort Musa, now known as Fort Mose, the first all-Black legally sanctioned community in what would become the United States. Located 2 miles north of St. Augustine, the settlement and fort were supported by Spanish colonists in the 1700s, and the Black population was composed of escaped enslaved people who had left British colonies and the Carolinas for freedom. The result of Hurston's research was an October 1927 article in the Journal of Negro History that described the unique community, the remains of which weren't unearthed until the 1980s. Actually, it's underneath, it's way out there in the swamp, and it's been inundated in the centuries since it existed. Biographer Valerie Boyd writes that Hurston had little interest in the material as it took her away from her folklore research. However, her articles make it clear that Hurston was familiar with the rich history of the area and contributed to academic understanding of it. All right, next slide. There we go. Hurston's most enriching time in St. Augustine was spring 1942, when she rented a room in a 2-story wooden building in the west side of the city and dove into finishing Dust Tracks on a Road, her autobiography. To earn extra money, Hurston taught at the nearby Florida Normal and Industrial College. The autobiography was published in 1942 and was well reviewed by critics. It remains one of Hurston's finest works, fudging a few facts about her age and omitting some important points, including overt statements that might be seen as inflammatory, Boyd notes. However, it offers a vibrant portrait of Eatonville and her colorful experiences from traveling around Florida. The house is in the middle on the bottom, and the marker is right up above it. The city of St. Augustine, a bastion of historical sites, owing to its identity as the oldest continuously occupied city in the US, has embraced Hurston and her work through 2 memorials, a marker outside the house where she lived in 1942, and a park at one of the city's busiest intersections, both created in part by the perseverance of Darian Andrew, an English professor at Flagler College, and her husband, historian David Nolan. Nolan, who helped get 31 civil rights era markers installed around St. Augustine, which has a dark record of Jim Crow racism, came to the city in 1977 and started looking for Hurston sites. He found the record of her marriage license to Sheen at the county courthouse, but couldn't locate her residence since she didn't own the property. While giving a community talk, he mentioned his crusade, and 2 people told him about the building where Hurston had rented a room. At one point, the building at 791 West King Street was the site of a crack cocaine bust, and the city considered tearing it down. But a determined resident, Johnny Pasco, who's in the picture to the left, she moved in, kept the house, and refused the city's offer of relocation. In 2003, the county put a historic marker there to memorialize Hurston's residency. And Andrew takes her classes to the historic marker and to that site 1/2 mile west of where the school, its name later changed to Florida Memorial College, once stood. And that's the red marker at the bottom, and above is just about all that's left of where that school was. These are concrete reminders of Hurston's work and residency. When termites threatened to take whatever remained of the house in 2013, Nolan, Andrew, and others, including Flagler College students, started a campaign to raise money for its fumigation. Citizens for the Preservation of St. Augustine came up with the final $1,000, allowing the work to take place. Today, the 2-story building has a fresh coat of blue and white paint, making it easy to spot, but only the first floor is safe, leaving Hurston's room unvisitable. All right, next slide. Nolan and Andrew also pushed hard to have a city park named in Hurston's honor, noting that the author regularly walked by the site at King Street and US 1 to collect her mail in the city's plaza. They mobilized book clubs and other Hurston fans and ultimately got Zora Neale Hurston Memorial Park approved in 2016. Andrew said, "To me, markers are a way to say thank you to the artists who have lived and struggled and been themselves, and that in turn inspires our students and the people in the community. The marker illuminates that particular history and its object. Its presence tells a story that, when you begin to look into it, unpacks the story of the artist's life." Next slide. Hurston spent her last 2 years in the coastal town of Fort Pierce, where she accepted a part-time journalism job at the Black weekly Fort Pierce Chronicle. She briefly taught English in early 1958 at Lincoln Park Academy, an all-Black high school, but lost the job when she failed to get a state's teaching certification. Biographer Virginia Lynn Moylan says, quote, her unconventional style of dress, including colorful skirts and blouses and big hats, generated nasty comments and gestures by some of her less sensitive students when her back was turned. Hurston also didn't follow the standard method of teaching via textbook, instead creating lessons based on stories and fables. Quote, none of her students knew how famous Zora was, but they enjoyed her class. Next slide. Hurston lived a stone's throw away from the school in a small cottage rented from Dr. C.C. Benton, who knew her father and brothers, and that's the building on the bottom right. Benton, who eventually waived rent, also was a friend, frequently visiting the author and including her in the family's Sunday dinners. Hurston lived simply, with little furniture and a small stove for cooking, Benton later recalled. Central to her life was the typewriter where she continued working on a play that she expanded into a novel, The Life of Herod the Great. Hurston believed the biblical king was misunderstood, and she worked for years on the project, which was never published or performed in her lifetime. The book, incidentally, was just published this month. Having the physician as a close friend was fortunate. By the time Hurston moved to Fort Pierce, her health was precarious. She was overweight and her cigarette habit had caught up with her, resulting in hypertensive heart disease caused by high blood pressure. Just to go back to the photos, on the top left is the library in Fort Pierce that has a really beautiful collection of Zora Neale Hurston books and memorabilia. On the right is the newspaper office where she once wrote for the Black newspaper. And on the bottom left is the site of what was Lincoln Park Academy, where she taught at the time. Again, so she's suffering from heart disease and high blood pressure. And at 67, pledged to get better, but her illness progressed and she refused Benton's suggestion that she contact her family. She insisted that she could take care of herself as she'd always done, with a little help now and then from her friends, Boyd writes. Benton kept an eye on the author, running errands with her. In October 1959, Hurston suffered a stroke and with it a loss of independence. She moved to the all-Black Lincoln Park Nursing Home, a county welfare operation. Benton recalled that she was weak from the stroke, which affected her thinking and kept her from writing. When her brother visited her, Hurston assured him she was fine and declined any financial help. Writes Boyd, if Zora was prepared to die, it was because she had lived such a full and fulfilling life. Believing, as she did, that people do not die, that they simply extend into new fields, into subtle realms, Zora faced death with the same courage and independence with which she had confronted life. That remarkable life ended on January 28, 1960, with a second stroke. And although some early chroniclers accurately recounted that Hurston, at age 69, had died in poverty, that was true, but she didn't die in obscurity. The local community gathered funeral donations that came from a disparate group as her publishers, from publishers to school children to the funeral home that donated a plot. A week later, more than 100 people joined together at Peak Funeral Chapel in downtown Fort Pierce to celebrate Hurston, who is recognized for her literary work by a handful of whites and many members of the Black community. Incidentally, among those in attendance were some of her former students from Lincoln Park Academy, including James Gibson, chosen to be a pallbearer. Gibson went on to fame as one of Florida's original highwaymen painters, a group of self-taught Black artists mentored by local landscape painter A.E. Bean or Beanie Backus. Hurston often joined Backus at his studio to listen to jazz sessions. Hurston's Fort Pierce haunts are highly celebrated of this city, which has created Zora Neale Hurston Dust Tracks Heritage Trail, a self-guided tour touted by pamphlets, banners on street posts, and a city website. It includes 8 different sites, including the Lincoln Park Academy, Hurston's final home, the Chronicle Building, the funeral home, Backus's house, and her grave. At each site, The city provides information markers to apprise visitors about Hurston and the meaning of each place. 3 additional kiosks are located around town, including the Zora Neale Hurston Library, where portraits of the writer and the display of her books are offered. Here we go. The true centerpiece of the tour, however, is Hurston's gravesite, where all the memorialization began with Walker's visit. Bo Driver, our humanities master instructor at Indian River State College, has seen many offerings there, including different food, including rice and beans, greens, pork chops, and a grapefruit, which he says may be a reference to a line in Their Eyes Were Watching God, in which a woman's buttocks were described as grapefruits in her hip pockets. It may reflect a time when the community, especially the Benton family, supported Hurston, he noted. Quote, I think some of the family bring food to memorialize her. I also have heard that the community members would often bring her dinner because she would get caught up in writing and not make her own food, end quote. And perhaps they are voodoo or hoodoo offerings to a woman who was fascinated by the practices she found in her travels to New Orleans and Haiti. Certainly they are meant to conjure up her memory and spirit. The trail, finished in 2004 at an estimated cost of $100,000, was envisioned by the city as a draw for cultural tourists. This helps preserve a memory of Fort Pierce, said city planner Raymond Trias. It helps explain a community to ourselves and to the rest of the world. All right, next slide. That same year was the city's Zora Fest, the first one, an annual all-day celebration similar to that in Eatonville, but with a local flavor that includes guest speakers, live food, and food vendors. The festival was on hiatus for several years, but found new life in March 2022 and has continued since. Marvin Hobson, an English professor and president of the Zora Neale Hurston Florida Education Foundation, wants the memory of Hurston to go much further. The nonprofit group has ambitious goals to celebrate Hurston. It has secured grants to convert the welfare home building, which was saved from demolition, that's on the bottom right, where she spent her final days, to convert it into the Zora Dust Tracks Museum and Humanities Center, expected to be completed this year. The museum will be a venue for performances, literary programs, and museum exhibits. In addition to funding, the group has gathered volunteers and support from local residents. An important component, says Hobson, to make this a grassroots project so the community knows it is theirs. A new goal is to buy the house where Hurston once lived that was owned by Benton that you saw on the previous slide. Marina Santos, Foundation Vice President, says, converting the nursing home building has become my passion. It drives me. Santos's mother, who once operated a senior center at the site, created an exhibit in one room to show how it might have looked during Hurston's time. Santos' hope is to see her vision come alive with the new construction. So these are some areas in the museum that was set up to demonstrate where Hurston might have lived, what her bed might have looked like, what her writing table might have looked like. Of course, none of these are original to Hurston, but it's their grand efforts to try to mimic what that looks like. While the original goal of the Hurston Trail may have been to lure tourists, the current push is to highlight history and to celebrate an extraordinary personality. Our main goal is to present positive images of African Americans in this community, Hobson said, noting that there were many important Black citizens during Hurston's time. We want to bring that back, those positive images. Hurston is the quintessential example of that. All right, next slide. In addition to these cities, there are many marked and unmarked sites around Florida you can find through their writings. On the top left is a picture of a turpentine operation, which may have been much like the one that once operated near Cross City, Florida. All you can find there now is a marker for the city of Shamrock. And this is my class that I took up there last spring after we had been reading Hurston's accounts of turpentining. And that was all we could find. I think that and Hardee's was about it. Hurston was there, however, as part of the Florida office of the Federal Writers Project in the 1930s, to collect stories, songs, and folklore of the Black workers who toiled in extremely harsh conditions. Hurston's job was to meet the workers, gain their cooperation so that another team could come in and tape record their songs and stories. Despite conditions akin to economic slavery, she won their trust and learned about beatings and even murders that might have been committed by camp bosses. Perhaps no other person could have accumulated these stories. Another important site in Polk County, which is on the top right, and I'm sorry, I wrote it wrong. It's actually Everglades Sawmill in Polk County. It's right on the Osceola line. But the Everglades Cypress Company, Hurston visited in 1928. Funded by a wealthy New Yorker, Hurston went there to collect stories as an anthropologist, but in order to do so, she had to use her chameleon-like ability to blend in. The workers initially were suspicious of her, but she gained their trust and protection by letting them drive her car and by standing on a table one night and singing John Henry to show that she understood them. Today, the lumber mill is long gone. I think it's a Publix now. The only remnants are the railroad track and a road marker, and her wonderful accounts of the mill and its people saved for the future generation in her book, Mules and Men. Next slide. So the main thing I want to say in this presentation is that Zora is remembered. Her presence and influence is memorialized in multiple Florida cities in different ways. And while other authors draw tours for some communities, Hurston's commemorations motivate the Black communities and neighborhoods where she lived, reminding them of her humble beginnings and final literary triumphs. These memorials are tangible reminders of her creative genius and her ability to inspire beyond the grave. And now I'm going to propose something. Because I've been traveling all over the place and looking at these sites, as well as the sites of other authors, I wonder if there might be a way to create a statewide Hurston Trail. I mean, already there are historical markers around the state and through the Southeast celebrating William Bartram, who was a naturalist who came through the colonies in the 1770s and wrote about it. There's DeSoto trail markers as well, where people tried to guess where Hernando de Soto and his expedition of 1539 traveled through the states. But there's many other cities. Jacksonville was home to Hurston. She traveled all over. And I'm just wondering if there might be a possibility of a future marked path for Hurston. Maybe not with markers, but at least with some kind of map that could be disseminated to people. I mean, I know I'm one of those people who would go on the trip and already have, and I'm guessing many of you have done the same thing. So just my idea. And that's it. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Leslie. That was amazing. Yeah. I don't know if people can show clapping hands, but yes, that was amazing.
That's okay.
All right, so we don't have any questions in the Q&A, but I do have a question that I want to just ask. So when you think about all of the places you've been and how Zora has impacted and inspired these places to keep her legacy going, what do you think we can learn from how Zora Neale Hurston was that would help us in our day and time to know what we need to preserve?
I think she had a real love and a real understanding of working class people and knew that their stories were really, really valuable. And we are fortunate because she was just the right person to collect them. She recognized it. I cannot see me walking into a turpentine mill and getting people to talk to me, right? And so I think that she's preserved so many of these stories are just, a treasure that we all have. And I think the really cool thing about going to these places is it's not so much the places, it's the people that I talk to and how much they love Zora and how they see her as a way to really inspire the local community and help remind people of what vibrant areas they live in. And I think that's really fascinating. I mean, that she's not just an author, she's kind of an inspiration as well.
Sorry, we do have a question.
Okay.
And the question said, thank you. How old was she when she passed again?
She died in 1960. I think I said she was 68. I'm a, a stickler for numbers. Oh, I'm sorry, she was 69 and she died in January 1960. So she actually died on, let me see, January 28th. So we're coming up to the anniversary of her passing. And a lot of people, some early biographers just said she kind of died in obscurity, but the local community, they knew who she was. And that's one of the fun stories as well. And the fun story about the highwaymen, they were all teenagers at the high school and had classes with her. And then they go on to have their own story as well. It's a really rich Black history in the Fort Pierce area.
Someone asked, will we be able to have access to the recording to refer back? Yes, you'll contact the Association to Preserve the Eatonville Community because they will have the recording that you can see. So that's that. So I did not know that she taught that one of the highwaymen, or probably a few of the highwaymen. That was something really, really interesting, which kind of is phenomenal that her reach goes way beyond, herself. When you look at what they did, what the highwaymen did, and all of the exhibitions that have been happening all around the country about the work of the highwaymen. I did not know Zora was attached to that. So that was some good information.
They were, there was this local artist, he was white, who lived in a lovely home near the waterfront. And he invited the young men to come paint with him in his backyard. And every now and then he'd give them one of his canvases to take home with him and they would copy it. So this is where we think of them as self-taught, right? They really had no instruction. He was very kind and generous to them, but Zora knew the artist as well. She would go, like I said, go listen to jazz at his house. And I mean, I would just love to have been a fly on the wall to observe some of that. I think it would have been really fun.
Yeah, it's amazing. We don't realize the people we have among us, and Zora probably was one of that to them, but they just didn't know the power of who she was. So we're getting more questions in the chat. Which brother went to see her when she had the stroke in Fort Pierce? Do you know
I'm not
that?
sure. I'm sorry. I'd have to go back into all my biographies to look. I'm really not sure.
Okay. There's another one that says, have you researched any of her works in visual anthropology?
Have not. I have not. I've kind of been concentrating on this project and reading her books, but if you have something to share, I'd love to see it.
All right. We have a couple in the Q&A. I really enjoyed this talk. What do you think Zora Neale Hurston's life can show us about the Black individuality in tandem with the Black community? Oh, excuse me, in tandem with Black community.
Okay. Well, she didn't always get along with some of her contemporaries, particularly in the Harlem Renaissance group, who felt like that she was not, joining them in their advocacy. And, she didn't really seem to care. I think Zora was more of an individualist, and I think she was happy to do that. And if she made people mad, I don't think she really cared. And I think that's something to be treasured. I often think that that's, the sign of a woman over 50. We're kind of like that. But I really admire her independence. She was so resilient. She went from, high times in Harlem to living on a houseboat to living in a house that she couldn't even pay the rent for in Fort Pierce, but she still kept writing and she still kept working, and she never stopped. And I think that's a model for everybody, not just for Black communities, but certainly she can become a real, not, I want to say icon, but someone that we can all look to and admire.
Thank you. We have another question in the Q&A. What do you think has been the reason for the state not elevating Zora's legacy in the form of state tours and markers?
I don't know. I think it's a great idea. I think, as usual, it usually takes a grassroots group to get the ball rolling, and probably needs some funding. But I think in Eatonville and in Fort Pierce, that has pretty much come from within the community. And now I think both of these communities, especially with this conference here in Eatonville, has risen to national attention. So I mean, I don't know what the legislative atmosphere is these days, but I think it would be a wonderful project for the state.
We have one in the chat. Did Zora ever marry?
Oh yeah. I think she married 3 different times. She didn't like to talk about it. And the gentleman she married in St. Augustine, that one didn't last very long at all. She just didn't want men telling her what to do, pretty much, and wasn't particularly worried about being married as a status.
All right. And this one comes from Scott. Why is Jacksonville not more active in commemorating Zora's memory?
I know, right? I agree. I found a newspaper article that a local reporter up there had written talking about where to find Zora in Jacksonville. And I couldn't find that anything had ever come from that. But I think that that's, it's a perfect place. She went to, again, she was everywhere. And it would be, if everybody around the world is going to claim Hemingway drinking in their bar, then certainly all these cities in Florida would stand to benefit from knowing for sure that this wonderful writer had visited and done work there or research there.
Good, thank you. All right, so we have one from the chat. It says, very interesting presentation. One anecdote I found interesting was the middle-aged white man who went to one of the bars she wrote about in her books. That makes me think a lot about the outreach of her work. To you, how is Zora's work been seen outside of the Black community?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I think she's well loved. Race does not matter. I think most English departments teach her now across the United States. I read her when I was doing research on Florida history and fell in love with her writing, and her descriptions of nature are what really get to me. I'm an environmental studies professor. And so when I'm reading, particularly Their Eyes Were Watching God, and reading about her experiences and nature, and you can read a lot of symbolism into some of the, like the fruit tree in her yard and things like that. I just think she speaks to everybody. I think she speaks a universal language, and I think that's why, and it's a shame that she was kind of forgotten for so long, but it's wonderful that she's been, becoming really part of the mainstream. When I asked my students if they've read Hurston, almost all of them had read her in high school, which I find really fabulous, really fabulous.
Is she still required reading in high school? I knew she was a while back.
I don't know, but I get students from all over the United States, so almost all of them have read her and are happy to read her again if I want them to read a new passage or something.
Okay, we have more questions coming in. Did she have influence in South Florida?
I couldn't find that she spent a lot of time in South Florida. But I mean, the next step would be to follow her to New Orleans, where she spent some time, right, researching voodoo and hoodoo. And then we know her Barracoon book came from there when she interviewed the man who likely was the last enslaved person to come to the States and the last person to be alive. Haiti, although I'm not going to go there to put in a marker right now, but certainly there are international places that could claim her as well. And I think that, again, this is my proposal. You asked me to speak, and so I'm giving you my opinion. I think it would be wonderful.
Thank you. All right, so we have another one in the Q&A. It says, how can we support these communities that have already begun preserving her legacy? It is a concern that outside voices will try to push out the communities that are already doing the work.
Well, I mean, there's nonprofits that in Eatonville and in Fort Pierce that have formed in order to take donations for their preservation work. And certainly those are welcome. That's a good way. You can attend the festivals. You can, get the word out that these projects are going on. The Fort Pierce folks have gotten money from the state, but they've also collected a lot of local funds too, and they want it to be, a community-based project as well. So, I mean, maybe talking to state legislators or representatives who might have their finger on state funding could be helpful too. I'm sure the Eatonville group would be thrilled to have some financial help as well. And I know that at one point, we were under consideration for the African American Museum, and I think we lost out to what, St. Augustine?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a shame, but but these are opportunities that are out there.
Right. And I can say, as a person who has been working with Preserved Eat Meal Community for over 30 years, that one of the ways that you can support the organization is to become a yearly member of the organization. That's one simple way. And also to do whatever you can to promote the Zora and Hurston Festival that we have every year, with coming out and and giving the information out to your various pockets of people. It's the longest running festival, I believe, in the country. I believe it's the longest. Somebody can correct me if it's not, but it's the longest running humanities festival in the country. It's been what, like 36 years now, Scott?
Yes, exactly. Which is remarkable. I think if Dr. Nathiri is still with us, they now use the phrase one of, if the sort of the oldest or most longest running, community grassroots preservation group in the United States. It's a remarkable achievement.
Yes, let me give you the official wording. The Hurston Festival is America's longest running arts and humanities festival, celebrating the cultural contributions of people of African ancestry throughout the diaspora. And you think diaspora means throughout the places where people of African ancestry live, the Caribbean, Europe, and throughout the world. And so that's the distinction. Arts and humanities, it's very specific, because there are arts festivals that have come and gone. But yes, we do hold that distinction.
Thank you for that, Dr. Nathiri. Now, we do have a couple of more questions, Leslie, from the Q&A. This one reads, what can we learn from Hurston's legacy and that of Eatonville when it comes to interpreting and telling the story of Black communities' resilience in the 21st century?
Whoa, that's a whole paper in and of itself. But I mean, and I'd love to hear what you think about it as well. But I mean, I would say that Eatonville and Hurston were both able to kind of adapt to the changing circumstances around them and still persevere and still find life and love and heart within the community. And I know Eatonville's had a lot of problems that came against it when I-4 came through, but the community holds a really important piece of heart for people in Central Florida, and I think around the country. And I think that Zora has helped, it's kind of, in a sense, stay on the literary map. What do you think, Trent?
Well, I think that, given that Zora and Hurston's contemporaries, some of them, did not particularly care for the fact that she wrote about, let's say, for instance, in Their Eyes Are Watching God, love stories, which is essentially, it is a love story, amongst other things, that her value comes in seeing Black people and Black culture outside of the realm of, in Jerusha Graham's words that I just heard on Saturday, distressed bodies, right? And speaking of Jerusha Graham, if you guys go to the Hurston Museum in Eatonville, you'll see her work that deals with this idea of Black people and Black communities and Black spaces that are not about distressed bodies, but about acceptance and love and universality, all drawn from her own personal experiences. And I think that that's the legacy that Zora and Hurston left. I did a series of paintings a while back on the history of Maitland. And one of the things that I focused on in that painting series were the Black people who did the work that built Maitland. And it was not about how bad their lives were. It was about the fact that they lived and they thrived and they had birthday parties, they had anniversaries, they did not live lives of distress. That's not how they were defined totally. And so personally, I think that that is something we need to learn from Hurston to look at the beauty that we have in our lives and not always look at the distress that we feel, because that does not define who we are.
I like that. That's great.
We have another one that says, I'm a professor and I'm always thinking pedagogically about how my research can benefit students. How have you thought about teaching your research? What are some ways that students, grade school and or college, can learn from the marvelous work you've done? I think that's, can you understand that question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the compliment. I appreciate it. This is a work in progress that I've been working on. So for example, this past spring, I was teaching a class about Florida literature and history, and I dragged my students up, and you saw the picture in Shamrock, but they had first read Hurston's accounts of the turpentine camps and the Polk County lumber camps, and that's all available online or in her books. And then we talked about what does that mean, and look how history seems to be erased, right? And then we went to Fort Mose in St. Augustine, where you stand on that dock and you imagine what this community looked like, and we know from her writing, how important it was, and she was writing decades before the anthropologists actually found and archaeologists actually found the site of Fort Mose. But it's an important site, and so it was really great to be able to take them on site. I'm a huge believer in field trips, and if I can drag my students out to see something that we've been talking about in class, they start to hear my voices, wah, 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 wah. But once they're on site, then they can relate the readings to the real story, and I think that that's really, really valuable. And so I would say, I don't know where you live, but if you have kids that you can manage to get out to some of these sites, that would be great. Even if it's just to downtown Eatonville to see that mural over in the basketball courts, or her picture on the archway coming into the city. I mean, it's just a reminder of, again, that brings her to life.
Let me say this before too many people start to leave. In the chat, Scott French has placed a survey questionnaire. If you guys can hit that QR code and give a survey of the presentation, this will help preserve email community in terms of getting grants and reporting on grants, and also to know the impact the organization has had. So please click on that or put your QR code thing on that thing. I'm least techie like you, Leslie. So y'all know what y'all need to do with the QR code. Just do that thing and take the survey. All right. And Scott, you've placed it in there, but people have asked more questions. So if you could place it in there again so that it's real recent, that's great. I'm going to read a couple of more questions. I mean, I know we're going over, but I don't want to let anyone's questions go unanswered. All right, so here's another one. Are there communities in Florida that hold valuable history on Zora? I would love to travel to those areas and read more about the history of Zora. And you've gone through most of these here, or all of these in your presentation. So
yeah, well, one option too, and I did this, is just Google up Zora Neale Hurston markers, and you will find them, and they are, and there's a historical marker website that loves to show you historical markers, so it may give you an idea of where to find some. There's a couple in Sanford. They're not very big, and they're a little washed. One of them is a little bit washed out, but I mean, so that's one way to find them as well. And again, if you go to the city of Fort Pierce, or you go to Eatonville and type in Zora Neale Hurston Trail, I'm sure you will find the information to find these. At the museum in Eatonville, you can get a walking trail map that will help you find those sites as well. And that's really fun. And I've done that a couple of times now.
Well, I think we're gonna go ahead and end. And by the way, in the chat, so many people have been talking about how phenomenal the talk was.
Thank you.
But I've only been reading the questions. But just know that this has made an impact on a lot of people. So Thank you so much. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Dr. Nathiri. Thank you for the Zora and Hurston Festival for bringing you here to Seminole State to present to us. And we really do appreciate your giving us your expertise. And this was very, very wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you. It was a lot of fun.
And
All
please
right.
join us tomorrow and Friday, because this wonderful academic conference continues with 2 full days of programming. And I have included in the chat, and we're still live here, so you can still grab that link. It's zorafestival.org, and go to the academic conference, and it has all of the events. You can go tomorrow in person to St. Lawrence African Methodist Episcopal Church, and from 10 o'clock tomorrow till 4:30, and again on Friday from 10 to 4:30, we have a jam-packed program. I have one of our keynote speakers right here, Dr. Claire Hines, who has come all the way from the University of East Anglia in the United Kingdom to talk about place and placemaking. And we have other amazing speakers, panels, student presentations, an Eatonville Citizens panel. Take a look at the schedule, because I think there's something here for everybody.
Yeah, and I'll also add that in addition to the academic conference, if you go to zorafestival.org, you will see everything this organization is doing, not just these few days. The academic conference is only one part of what the Zora and Hurston Festival is. I think there is something for everyone. There's even a rent party. If you want to go to a rent party, look for that on the website. Also, the Street Festival of the Arts, where we have vendors from all over the country coming to Eatonville to sell their wares. There's so much for everybody. So please go to zorafestival.org, and you'll find something there. So thank you all for coming out.
Thank you, Trent, for hosting and moderating. Thank you, Leslie Poole, good friend always of the festival and Preserve Eatonville community.
It was a
Great.
pleasure. Thank you so much. Good to see some friendly faces out there too.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.